today's webinar. This is another of our Soft Focus Live events. These have been very successful throughout the last few weeks while we've all been struggling with the impact of coronavirus on our businesses. And I'm very keen today that we have yet another successful session. As you can see from my slides on the screen, we're joined by a couple of panelists. Matt Smith, who's Business Development Manager at Security Sales at Vodafone, and Paul Keogh, the Sector Director for Food Manufacturing, Cleaning and Transport at ISS. So thanks very much to Matt and Paul for joining us. Today's session will be chaired by Jamie Wheel, who's also a fellow SOFHT Director, but he's also Head of Compliance at Aston Manor Cider. This session we hope to cover some of the thermal imaging techniques that we've heard about and some businesses are using, and Matt and Paul are coming to share some of their experience and knowledge around these systems, but we very much invite those of you on the call to join the conversation. You can use the chat function within Teams to ask your questions, or if you want to talk to any of our panelists or any of us directly, then please use the raise hand function and we can bring you into the conversation. Also just want to remind you that we do record these sessions because we want to share them with our members and non-members who can't attend today. So just to be aware that any questions or any video will be recorded and shared. So if everyone can still hear me okay, I'm going to hand over now back to Jamie.
Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks for taking the time to listen. I know everyone's hugely busy in current climate, so it's really good that you've taken the time to listen and hopefully contribute to the session. I think it's been fair to say that, the sessions have been running for a number of weeks for the benefit of our members free of charge. So I hope that everyone has been gaining benefit. What we really like to get out of the session today, as well as the specific subjects that we're going to talk about, is to get a view from those that are listening in about how often we want to be running these events going forward. So we've already running really successful breakfast briefings on different subjects. So it would be good to get people's opinion really as to how often we want to be running these Soft Focus Live sessions. We've been running them for a number of weeks every week. Whether or not we continue that frequency going forward, we'd really like to get people's opinions on really. So if you wouldn't mind, just dropping us a note to see how often you would like these particular types of sessions to be run, that'd be really, really useful. So we've got a really good session today. We've got an expert panel to discuss a few topics. So we'll be looking in a fair amount of detail about the health surveillance aspects and thermal imaging, and then we'll also want to touch on medical screening and quarantine requirements. So myself, Fiona, and the other panelists will obviously give our opinions and our experiences on that. But again, we would ask those that are listening in to share their experiences as well. Obviously, if anyone's got any questions, then please ask those. We've got a maximum of an hour booked in for the session. We'll see how we get on as to whether or not we need an hour. And I'll collate the questions as we go through and ask them. So in terms of today's panel, you'll see that we've gone with quality rather than quantity. There's only a few of us today, so thanks for those panelists that are joining in. And what I'll do, if that's okay, I'll leave it up to the panelists to introduce themselves. If we can maybe start with Paul from ISS. I know you've been heavily involved in relation to health surveillance and thermal imaging equipment. So maybe if we can start with you, Paul, just to give us an idea on your experiences of health surveillance and thermal imaging and the protocols that certain businesses have been undertaking.
Yeah, of course. Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I wouldn't say that I or ISS are experts in the field, but the question had come up on a number of these soft sessions. So we thought we'd share the experiences, For those of you that don't know, ISS are a facilities provider, so we work alongside major manufacturers across the UK and actually across the globe. And I'm part of a team that tries to share best practice across various aspects. So a lot of what I'll talk about today is what we're doing in the UK. Some of it is what ISS propose. Some of it is what our clients propose. Some of it is what we come across together. And I've also spoken to some of my colleagues in other countries and seen what they've done in terms of taking things a stage further. So one of the questions came up on one of these sessions a couple of weeks ago about, what's the be all and end all? Well, unfortunately, there isn't one. We talk about a multifaceted risk-based approach. Entry prerequisites to sites. We've always asked, all of our manufacturers and many of our food production facilities have asked for, a self-certification, a question and answer assessment. A lot of those have been updated over recent months to include specific questions that should highlight particular issues that are related to the COVID-19 virus, but it's not an absolute. A physical condition check of somebody is not an absolute in terms of preventing people with the virus from entering your facility and therefore increasing the risk. And likewise, temperature checking. So what we talk about having an armory of tools that help to reduce the risk. We know that a number of people can carry and spread the virus and will be asymptomatic. And again, that's one for the medical experts, not for me. But if you can have a series of checks in place that reduce the likelihood of people coming in. So the question was asked about what happens if somebody refuses to be temperature checked. It becomes part of the entry prerequisites to your site. Whether you have a manned security or reception area, whether you have a turnstile, it has to form part of the prerequisites if you decide that temperature checking is going to be part of your armory. Where you've already got a manned entrance and you're able to, as many of our sites have done, we've limited the number of entrances, so we've reduced them in order to funnel people through one area where they can be checked. You can have manual checking systems, so literally handheld thermometers used by a person behind the screen, wearing the correct PPE, and giving you an instant indication. I've got some examples of them if people want them. What I haven't got the commercials around them, but I can give you an idea of low cost, high cost, those sorts of things. A couple of our customers wanted to go because of the volume of people coming through an area, or the fact that there was a main turnstile entrance that wasn't manned. They wanted to go to automated thermal imaging. So there are a couple of different systems that we're actually buying on behalf of our customers or identifying as the right ones to use. One of them has been used successfully in a number of airports, so it can measure the temperature range of up to about 30 people at a time. We're talking quite high costs there, so you need a high footfall entrance or a high volume site to make it actually, cost effective. There is then an app that can be added to that, so even if you have an unmanned area, it can highlight that an individual has the need to be retested, needs to be checked in other ways, needs a discussion before they're allowed onto site. Our colleagues in Turkey have actually worked with the manufacturer of the turnstile system, and the temperature checking is this side of the turnstile, and the turnstile won't open. So they've reprogrammed the security cards, chips in the security cards, and unless the person has passed the temperature test, the turnstile won't open. So then there is a telephone number for them to call, or a dial-up system, and somebody from inside the factory will come and see them, and then we'll perform a further assessment. What we don't say is that by checking everybody's temperature and letting people in who are below the acceptable limit, you will stop COVID-19 coming into your factory or into your premises, whatever it is. But it is a useful tool in the armory. If anybody wants me to show, some of the different versions, I can do. If people want to ask questions around that. the big thing for us is always about how many different things can we do, and putting a whole basket of tools together to say, right, okay, this then presents the best case scenario.
Thanks, Paul. I think it would be useful if you've got some examples. You can.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, this is one of the if people can see my screen, shout if you can, Jamie.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a non-contact forehead thermometer. Works on a laser, handheld. Works at up to I think it's 2.5 meters or something, but it will measure instantly. So if you have a manned security area or a manned reception, people maintaining social distancing or using screens or the correct PPE can then actually take the temperature, and it's just a yes or no. If it's a no, and of course we're encouraging people to walk to work and cycle to work and so on, so you may be hotter when you get to work than you normally are, then usually there's a holding area where people are then retested after a predetermined amount of time. They're checked for other symptoms. And this goes alongside the questionnaire that they're completing. There are then some other. So there is a free. That's probably not a very good picture, actually. This is probably a better picture. So there are some freestanding units that have been used within the airports. So it's a freestanding unit here that uses an infrared camera, and again, this can be put either side of a turnstile. It can give an audible alarm, it can give a visible alarm, it can email the head of health and safety. It can pretty much do anything you want it to do if you're going to pay for the additional programming that goes behind it, and it's all around slowing the spread of the virus by finding temperatures. But as I say, it's not a catch-all situation.
We've been asked a question all about threshold temperature. So what temperature threshold of people actually be setting it at?
That's on one of my slides. I'm not the expert. If John Richardson's on, he's probably got it. I haven't taken anybody's temperature, so but I do know it's on one of these here. We're working to the WHO guidelines, which are reinforced by Public Health England, that say a temperature over, and I will find the figure, a temperature over a certain level is a possible indicator. I'll find that and I will answer it.
Hi Paul, it's Matt. Do you want me to give you that figure?
Thank you.
It's 37.3. Anything above that is the early onset of a potential fever.
Good man. Thanks, Matt.
No worries.
And then I suppose a question from me in terms of protocol surrounding that. If you're measuring someone's temperature, you get to a certain level where potentially you're saying, there's a risk there. What protocols are businesses then putting in place in relation to that? Are they literally just saying, okay, you get to that temperature, see ya? Or are they then saying, well, wait here for 5 minutes and we'll check your temperature again just to make sure, it's not because of the way you've travelled into work and an elevated temperature? What protocols are businesses implementing in relation to that?
So on the protocols that we've put into place and that have been signed off by our customers include at least one retest. It's usually between 10 and 30 minutes after the initial test, to allow the person's temperature to have calmed down if they have travelled in through an exertive method of transport. What we also do is we ensure that they're moved to an isolation room or something like that, so that it means that if they do fail the second one, the recommendation now is that they immediately book in for the formal test, whether it's the test at home or a test centre, that they travelled straight home, and the communication level has to stay quite high with them. I mean, testing is coming back, the national testing scheme, most tests are coming back within 72 hours now. They've committed to a target of a maximum of 96 hours. From personal experience, my children were tested on the Thursday afternoon and the results came back on the Friday afternoon. So it can be that quick. But the protocol is to isolate the person, retest, then follow whatever the site procedures are. And our recommendation is that it is to travel straight home, book in for the test, and then communicate with the workplace again. And immediately after that, the isolation area, all the equipment, etc., is sanitized and cleansed again. Most of this equipment is non-touch, but you still sanitize and clean the area from a suspected case anyway.
Okay, that's really useful. Well, I suppose one of the questions trying to establish a protocol within our business in relation to someone suffering symptoms. If, for example, they've travelled in via public transport, would you then expect them to go back via public transport, or are you then, booking them a taxi and that type of thing?
So this morning we booked one of our own staff a taxi home, having failed a temperature test on 3 separate occasions over 35 minutes. And we actually booked them a taxi home. I think that's very much down to either the individual employer or the site in terms of what you do with the protocol. But our view was, it's a taxi home, book the test, give us a call this afternoon, let us know when your test is arriving or if you're going out to get tested.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that, Paul. It's really, really useful. So in terms of our other panelist, Matt from Vodafone, it'd be good to get your opinion on this subject in terms of what involvement have you have within Vodafone?
Yeah, no problem. Afternoon, everyone. So thank you for the invite. So what I thought I'd do is I'll just talk around what Vodafone are doing in terms of heat detection solution. So we developed a camera heat detection solution to firstly protect our own staff. So as you can imagine, we run a 24/7 network operations center. So keeping those people safe is paramount to the solution that we brought to market. So how it works at the moment is that we, like Paul was alluding to, we've got multiple entry and exit points to the building and multiple turnstiles. So we've closed all of those down to just one entry exit and one turnstile, and then we set up a swim line type approach to that to the bollards to get through into the premises. So what happens is the heat detection camera is both a thermal imaging camera and a high definition camera. Now, why that's important is that our solution is able to take your temperature between 2 to 5 meters away from the camera. So you approach the camera and it is taking your temperature every 0.5 seconds. So what it does is there's 2 ways of using it. You can use it to self-serve, i.e. This is how Vodafone staff are using it. They're walking up to the camera. They can quite clearly see on the laptop display their last 4 temperatures, and that's taken every 0.5 second. It's down to an accuracy rate of 0.3. So if it was to go into the left-hand side of the laptop, then you know that your last 4 temperatures are below the temperature threshold. And we've actually got ours set at 37.8, and that's just based on NHS guidelines and our HR policies in terms of, we believe 37.3 is too low, so we've just set ours at 37.8. So what happens then is that you would then turn left when you get to within 2 meters of camera, and then you go through the turnstile, on you go. If you approach the camera and you breach the temperature threshold, what happens is that the box that is around your head with the temperature will turn from blue to red, and you would go into the right hand side of the laptop and it would show the 4 temperature ranges that you have breached the temperature threshold. So what happens then is, again, like Paul says, we've got a side room set up, so our employees would then go into that room for further questioning, and it's you know, as basic as are you feeling unwell, have you cycled to work, have you ridden to work. So in the sort of 3 or 4 weeks that we've had this set up, we've had one person that has breached that temperature threshold, and after a side conversation, he cycled to work. So it's well known that 30 minutes of strenuous exercise raises your body temperature by 0.5 of a degree. So he went above that, but then, you know, safe to say that after a glass of water and a 15-minute break, we rescanned him and he was under the temperature threshold and free to go on into the premises. So in terms of the technology, so what the technology is doing, it's doing a thing called face detect. So that's not facial recognition. It's basically recognizing a person's face. And why that's important is that if you have a cup of coffee, you're not getting a temperature reading off that cup of coffee. And what it does it's taking your peak pixel temperature. Now that's usually your inner canthius, so that's usually like the hottest place on your face. So what it's taking your skin temperature. So if somebody's wearing glasses, it then takes a forehead, but then the system is clever enough to then apply an algorithm to get it more in tune with your core body temperature. What happens is it will only record when somebody breaches the temperature threshold. So all of that images, because, you know, why I'm involved, I work for Vodafone Secure Sector. Why I'm involved in the solution is that we have, you know, we're really security conscious on this, because, you know, this is private medical data that you are recording. You are storing a 10-second clip of both the thermal image, the HD image, and then obviously the temperature range. So that is all stored locally on the hard drive as part of our solution. That image can be stored from anywhere to 1 to 30 days, and then it auto deletes. But what also our solution is able to do is when somebody breaches that temperature, it sends an alert to a separate iPad. So that iPad could be in the same building, it could be anywhere else in the country, so you can centrally manage our solution. So if you've got the camera set up for self-serve, i.e. people are checking their own temperature when they walk towards the solution, you can centrally manage it through the iPad, and then basically see the alert, go in and view that 10-second clip. It's all 256K encrypted enhanced standard. So that means that it never touches the internet. It doesn't have any integration into your networks because it's all run over our IoT. So again, it just means that we can proactively monitor this and keep those images safe. The only time that you are viewing those images is when you are seeing the alerts on the iPad and then replaying that 10-second clip. So we offer 24/7 on this, and if any part of the solution was to break, then we send out a replacement part, and DV, SV cleared engineers will attend site and swap out the faulty piece of equipment and get it all back up and running again. So we're very proud of what we've got. It's proven very, very successful. We've deployed this in a number of sports stadia. So we're currently helping the English Cricket Board get back to behind closed doors test matches. We've deployed it into production lines, into big warehouses. It's just really valuable. Again, like Paul says, it's not a COVID-19 checker. That's why we call it heat detection. It's just a piece of kit in your arsenal to be able to try and make sure that people feel comfortable about the returning to work, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to minimize the potential spread of the disease. That's it. Any questions? Happy to field that, and also I will follow up with our marketing information for you all on the call after this.
Thanks, Matt. That's really, really interesting. I mean, an initial question from me, whether that's for both of the panelists, really, in terms of has there been, or are you aware of any any negative feedback in terms of people don't want the temperature to be taken? Employees don't want the temperature to be taken.
No, so yeah, you do make a good point. What we're recommending is that this is no different to CCTV, because there is no regulations in the UK about taking this type of data. But then obviously we've designed the system to be in line with GDPR compliance. So even though this type of because we've come to market very quickly and the world's evolved very quickly, there is no we have to look at the US to try and work out what is the best practice, and the best practice is to tell your employees or customers, clients, that they are being recorded. And like I said, because we can customize it to keep that image from 1 to 30 days, that falls in line with compliance. But then we have had some situations where people don't want to have the HD image recorded for obvious reasons, so it is customizable just to give you the alerting and show you the thermal image. But it's very, very hard then to try and find that person from a thermal image. It looks like something out of Avatar, so that's why we obviously give the HD image to be able to helpfully go and retrieve that person and bring them back and then carry on in terms of your HR policies of allowing or rejecting people from your premises.
I think that's really fair, actually. I think in the very early stages, there was a little bit of resistance. I think we had a couple of customers who actually wanted to record individuals' temperatures on a piece of paper and track them over a period of time, because they felt that that was going to give them an indicator. And that was when the GDPR question came up, and we were able to advise them that that wasn't the way to go. A lot of this comes down to the education program, and a lot of the work we've been doing around the education program is visible education and nudging materials. So where we've introduced the keep your distance maps, floor signage, and people are becoming more used to that because they're finding it in their everyday life as well as in their work life. And if it says you need to stand here and have your temperature taken, and there are posters on the wall, there is, we're doing pre-visit instructions to people who don't work permanently at the site, and saying to them, this is what you will undergo when you arrive at site, and if you don't meet these, you won't be allowed access. In much the same way as you send out and you say these are the specific PPE requirements for the site, or if you've been to these countries in the last 3 months, you're not allowed onto our site. A lot of that stuff, it comes down to the education. And I think now people are becoming accepting of it, as long as they know that their personal data isn't being stored and compromised. So as long as you're GDPR compliant, as Matt says, and you're providing them with the education, then I think most people are accepting of it and actually welcome it.
Yeah, I mean, we have had a certain scenario where a customer was uneasy of people being able to see their temperature ranges by using the solution. So our system is customizable to be able to move the laptop behind a security desk or a reception desk, because they wasn't too comfortable with what it's like in most sort of office environments. If I'm going through the camera and my temperature range was going to the right and somebody was 2 meters behind me, then idle chit chat could be that the person behind me then goes into the office and says, oh, Matt Smith's just gone through, I saw that his temperature went into the right hand side of the laptop. So we kind of moved that all behind and then left it down to the security or the receptionist to sort of monitor that first line of check-in. Because we've got that sort of a alerting system on the iPad, you're then able to then have that second checking facility, and all of the cameras can be linked up to, like I say, one iPad, so you're able to then retrospectively go back in and look at all of the, because then you can start looking at sort of analytics and what I mean by this is, say London, you're getting a lot more alerting coming through from London. Why is that? Well, basically people are cycling or jogging to work, and that's probably the reason. So it's kind of a useful tool to be able to then sort of look at what's going on different locations in different parts of the country.
I have seen one example. It's not in a site where we're involved, and I don't know whether it's still up, but it's a 3x2 digital screen that's in the reception area that normally contains marketing information about the organisation. And the temperature is flashed up onto that screen as the individual passes. It's a little bit like the the speed cameras where it says you're doing 39. Please slow down. I actually saw a photograph and somebody said they felt that was a little bit over the top. Again, I think customers, it's about common sense. This needs to be in place, but it also needs to be strictly controlled, as Matt says. And by moving it out of the line of sight, it prevents any potential conflict with you're hot, you're cold, that sort of thing.
So one of the questions I have following on from that, obviously, in terms of the main function of those pieces of equipment is to measure temperature. In relation to COVID-19 symptoms, obviously that's just one of the symptoms. Have you had issues with, I think you mentioned, some of the premises you're filtering everyone into certain access areas as opposed to multiple access areas? Does that not then create, I suppose, further issues in terms of social distancing and also then much more regular cleaning of going through those set areas?
It does. So at one site where we used to have 3 entrances for staff, so swipe card entrances plus the main entrance. We've limited that now to just the main entrance, but we've actually closed off the access to the other areas as well. So there is no cleaning taking place there. So the saving in labour by not cleaning those areas or by only cleaning them once a week is now diverted to the main area where we have what we call a hygiene steward who's permanently on hand, permanently cleaning all around the area. It only worked because the client was able to stagger start times of shift, because we had up to 500 people coming in to start a shift at 7 o'clock in the morning. That's now been staggered. Otherwise, you would get that pinch point of everybody waiting to get through the single set of turnstiles. There is a large increase in that area in terms of arrows, nudging materials, eye level signage, floor level signage, telling people where they can and can't go. And there is an acceptance from people that whereas they used to walk through a gate and go straight into work, it now may take them 5 minutes. There's just an acceptance around that. And so people, because of the staggered shift times, arrive a little bit earlier, a little bit later, and we're able to actually keep that flowing quite well. Again, it comes down to how you can manage it based on your own local arrangements. And if you do have multiple entrances because it's a large site and it makes sense, or you've got multiple car parks, then it is a slight inconvenience. But most people are getting around to this is the new way of working. Therefore, it's slightly inconvenient, but there'll be a benefit somewhere else in the system.
What about yourself, Matt, with Vodafone? How are you managing that aspect in terms of are you able to stagger start and end times relatively easy?
Yeah, so it's only a skeleton staff in the network operations center, but why we've gone for the solution that we have gone is that it's just because of the way we've deployed it at the moment is just because of we've got not many people going through it, but once we start introducing people back into work, the camera's able to see up to 8 people within its field of view. And it's able to take a temperature of 100 people in a minute. So we rather than sort of invest in a solution that once we all start returning to work, we then need to buy more and more and more. The camera has got that capability to then introduce higher volume. So what we'll do is we'll open up all of our turnstiles, maybe introduce another camera to cover all of those turnstiles, but then we're able to then get multiple people through that turnstile just based on the camera's capability.
I assume in terms of the cost of that type of equipment, it can be sort of relatively expensive. How is it being dealt with like the, you mentioned larger entertainment venues?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie to you, we are the high end of this solution. But the reason why we are is because at the start of this, we had a German colleague come over from Vodafone. He contracted the disease, unfortunately, and it cost us a tune of 25k to have one of our buildings deep cleansed. So that's kind of why we've gone for the high end solution, to try and stop that happening again.
And in terms of just the handheld equipment that you mentioned earlier on, Paul, how popular is that? I'd be interested to get everyone else's viewpoint actually in terms of their particular businesses. One, if they're actually conducting monitoring of temperatures, and if so, what type of equipment are they using? We haven't had a huge amount of questions come through so far, so it'll be useful really.
There are a couple of cracking questions on there, though, and I'm quite happy to pick one of them up if you want me to. So the owner's question about what if the employee is worried about not being paid, and this was something that we discussed for a long time. Can they cheat the camera? Not the high-end solutions. No, they can't. Could they pour cold water onto themselves and pass the laser thermometer? Yeah, they probably could. We made the decision that when we send people home and they are showing symptoms, whilst they are awaiting the results of the test, they will be paid full pay. That was a decision that we made, irrespective of what our customers and our clients and our suppliers are doing. Now that the testing is coming back so quickly, that actually is quite a good idea. In the cases where people are saying if you're displaying symptoms, you're only on SSP, there is the obvious temptation for a member of staff to try and cheat it. They won't be able to cheat all of the checks that you have in place. So it's not just about the temperature, it's about the coughing, it's about the looking like the fever, it's about the tiredness, it's the shortness of breath, it's or a combination of symptoms that could be in place. I don't think you can say for absolutely certain no. Somebody could potentially get through, but then it comes down to local management and supervision as to are they identifying people that may start displaying symptoms after they pass the temperature check. So it's physically checking the people that are working in the area and on the production lines and so on. So it's a great question. It's a really difficult one for a lot of companies because they made a decision early that they would either use SSP or whatever. We foolishly, possibly at the beginning, but now it's turning out to be the right decision, decided that once people were displaying symptoms, they went home on full pay until they were tested and proven otherwise. So that was our way of dealing with it. I don't think there's a way of cheating the infrared one, unless you've watched the Avengers and have taken tips and tricks from that.
I can't. Are there any more questions there, Paul? I can't seem to find them on my chat.
Yeah. So that was from Fiona, and then Fiona had a follow-up. Any benefits of thermal screening over manually using infrared? From a personal point of view, the thermal screening means it's unmanned, non-touch. Definitely social distancing can apply. There is a risk that you have to get closer to the individual if you're using a handheld or the infrared. But from a technical perspective, I'm sure Matt has a better answer around that.
Yeah, so the handhelds can't get down to the accuracy rate. So when you're talking about very, very fine margins, I think, the handhelds get down to plus or minus 0.5, but then there is, you have to take into consideration ambient temperature. So ambient temperature is if you're near an air conditioning unit or if you're near a glass fronted building where the sun's shining. So that makes all the difference in terms of trying to get the accuracy rate. So our solution has a thing called a thermal black body, and what that is just a piece of equipment that's in the field of view of the camera that is constantly heating up to 35 degrees. So that kind of eradicates the ambient temperature, because the camera knows what 35 degree is, and that's how we're able to get down to the 0.3. So you just need to be mindful of handhelds. Like Paul said, you literally physically got to have somebody holding it 20 seconds away, 20 millimeters away from somebody's forehead, and the ambient temperature, and the fact that it can only get down to 0.5 accuracy rate. So it does have its uses, but the thermal image is completely unmanned. You haven't got to have somebody administrating the temperature checks. You set it up, and it just does what it says on the tin. It takes people's temperature, and it tries to not stop the flow of people into your building.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Are there any other questions there, Paul? For some reason, my chat isn't showing up any questions that are coming through, other than the initial one we had about the threshold temperature.
No, it's asking about, so a couple of people asking about cost, and yeah, the handheld infrareds, certainly the ones for anything other than domestic use, range from around about £50 up to about £250. Some of that will depend on your purchasing power as well. I'm not going to make recommendations as to which ones, but certainly we discounted anything that said it was for domestic use only, because the variance in temperature or the accuracy range was felt too great. That was around about 0.8, and we felt that was too great. Getting down to about 0.4, that most of the commercial ones were, gave us an acceptable threshold and then allowed us to retest. So somewhere between £50 and £250. No idea about Matt's kit, but if he wants me to clean his building for less than £25,000 in exchange, I'm sure we can do a deal.
What about lead times on equipment? What type of lead times are people looking at if they do want to order some of this?
So the handheld ones, we in the very early stages, lead time was about 7 to 8 days to get delivered. Now we're getting them either next day or 48-hour delivery when required.
What about your kit, Matt?
Yeah, so we're more in the 2 to 4 week lead time. Because as a solution that an engineer has to come down to site survey, set it all up, get it working, test it, hand it over to you, do training, etc., etc.
And how are you managing the social distancing aspect in relation to that type of thing in terms of site surveys and training?
Yeah, so if we can avoid it, i.e. we can get building plans and photos, then we can sort of recommend based on that. If we do have to go in, then obviously we're wearing full PPE, and just managing it in that vein.
Okay.
There's another question on here, Jamie. So Laura Brown, how do you see this type of equipment being used once pubs, restaurants and hotels reopen? Again, I think we touched on this a couple of weeks ago. I think it's going to be really difficult in the hospitality industry, because you'll have a group of people who are still reticent to go out. Then you'll have a group of people who want to go out but may not want to subject themselves to some of the tests and social distancing in those areas. My own personal view is I think there have to be a series of checks before you are able to enter a public place. But again, the guidance around social distancing looks as if it may well change again. I don't think the guidance around the symptoms or the measurement of symptoms. And I also think that there is the danger of a little bit of complacency from the general public, because doctors are treating people much better. That has slowed down the number of deaths. Social distancing has worked, and the quarantine has worked, so it has reduced the spread of infection in all but 2 areas in the UK to a very good, an acceptable level. If you were then subjected to, well, if you don't pass this temperature test, you can't eat in my restaurant or you can't drink in my pub, I don't know whether that would set people back. And I think that probably would be an individual business decision. My own personal view is I probably wouldn't want to go into a restaurant that didn't have some form of check in place, because whilst I may be comfortable about myself and not displaying symptoms, I may not be comfortable about everybody else in there. So I think that's one that we could probably spend a whole session discussing.
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. I think what certainly what they're doing in Italy and Spain is that restaurants are looking at people.
Sorry, Matt, we lost you there. Oh, is Matt gone? We lost him.
Yeah, I think he's gone quiet. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's been really, really interesting in terms of talking about that subject. I'm conscious that a couple of the other headlines on what we were going to talk about today covered a couple of other similar subjects as well. So we're wanting to talk about quarantine in terms of holidays and how businesses were potentially going to cope with employees taking holidays and then having to potentially self-isolate for 14 days. It's certainly one that within our business we've spent a lot of time contemplating processes that we've put in place and the potential implications for us. Again, I'd be quite keen to get people's view on what their businesses are doing. Obviously, the caveat is, we have the 2-week self-isolation for people returning to the UK. At the moment, whether or not that changes in the future, for us as a business, we have a new can line that's being built currently, and we've taken advantage of one of the exemptions that exists in terms of workers with specialist technical skills coming into the country. So we've certainly taken advantage of that. We did have people within our business asking whether or not just employees could also take advantage of that same exemption. So we've basically said no, that certainly fit within the government guidance and the spirit of that exemption. As I say, I'd be interested to get people's view on how their businesses are deal with it, because I think it could be quite a wide-ranging and difficult decision for a lot of businesses to make. I don't know if anyone's experienced had issues or discussed this within their business.
Yeah, I don't want to dominate, Jamie, but if we're waiting for somebody else to come in, so again, we looked at this. We made the decision that in order to be consistent and fair, if people are going away on holiday, you're right, they can't use the exemption scheme, no matter how highly skilled they are. So on their return for those 2 weeks, they either take unpaid leave or they use additional holiday. But what we have done is we have combined the 2 holiday years, 2020 and 2021, so that people can either carry over or can pull forward holiday. So we're looking at how that can work so that people aren't financially disadvantaged. We're also encouraging them to use the track and trace system, and if they display any symptoms, they immediately book in for the test. As soon as they book in for the test, they go on to full pay until the test results are known, and then they either return to work or if they are positive, then they continue to get paid for a period of time and then go on to normal sick rules apply. So we've looked at it. We struggled with it because, if you just say, well, yeah, it's a government guideline, therefore everybody stay on full pay, you will have some people, we probably all have them in our business, that will book 2 days in Spain in order to get 2 weeks full paid leave. But you have to find something that balances up the commerciality with the guideline. It's really interesting about the exemption because people are being discouraged from travelling. However, there is the need for technical specialists to move from country to country, exactly in the situation that you outlined. Developing new systems, products, procedures often requires overseas expertise. So it's important that that's there, but I think it is also important that it's not abused.
Thanks, Paul. I don't know if are there any other questions that have come through on any of that? Anyone willing to give a viewpoint on how their businesses are dealing with these aspects? Open question to everyone. There ain't been any more questions come through?
I'm just having a look now. So there's quite a few. Yeah, come on.
Hi, both. It's Fiona. No, I don't see any more questions, Jamie, but it's certainly interesting listening to Paul's view on it. And I think the silence probably reflects that a lot of us don't really know what's going to happen, do we? We don't really understand the impact of the quarantine restrictions and how it's going to work for our businesses broadly.
So from a retail point of view, Fiona, I don't think you've got anything you can add in terms of how you know, a large retailer have been dealing with these aspects. I don't know if you've been getting involved with that from your side.
I haven't been involved directly. I am aware of some trials. They've been looking at thermal imaging cameras for the distribution centres. But, you know, I think as we've talked through, there are some practical difficulties with it. And also, it's only one way, as you say, one tool in the armory in terms of what it's helping with. So I think they're exploring the idea of perhaps trialing it, but I don't think it's a solution necessarily. But also with these sorts of things, it will be interesting to see how common and how widespread they become, because people might be nervous of it appearing in their workplace, but actually if it starts to become common in the entrance of retail shops or in railway stations or airports, etc., then maybe in the future it will just become something that people are used to seeing as they walk into the entrance of a factory or a warehouse, etc. But also we need to be mindful of how people feel about it, what employees think we're going to do with the information, how it impacts them in terms of whether they're sent home or even if you get the example where perhaps you do test with a high temperature, but then your NHS COVID test comes back negative. So you're back in work 24, 48 hours later. Then what's the reaction of your colleagues around you? They'll be a bit wary, no doubt. So it's a very, very difficult situation. And we do have to be mindful that not all of the testing is 100% accurate. And we do have incidences of people testing negative only to turn out and test positive a week or so later. So yes, just lots to think about. And I think on the quarantine, we had a previous webinar where we talked about remote auditing and things. So although technical people can in theory travel, the impact on them personally and their family on any potential risk in the sites that they visit, it still feels more like we'll be using remote technology to do a lot of the inspections if we can. Hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Are there any final questions that have come through from anyone? Last chance before we wrap up, if that's okay. Any final questions? Can you see any, Paul?
No, nothing that we haven't already covered.
Okay.
And I don't think we got Matt back, did we?
I don't think so, no.
Which is a real shame.
Yeah, sorry, I'm back.
Oh,
I'm
you're
back.
There.
Sorry, apologies.
Right, no worries.
Do you have any final comments, Matt?
Yeah, so I just wanted to conclude. So I think a couple of bits and bobs for me. So we're working with a lot of travel companies, and they've been told that temperature checking is mandatory, given their applications, i.e. putting loads of people back on coaches. So that's quite interesting. And then just really to conclude around the sort of Spain and Italy piece. So what they are looking to do in terms of the hospitality industry is that they will build up almost like a temperature digital profile, so that when you go to a restaurant, you can say, look, I've been scanned here, I've been scanned at this place, I've been scanned here, and here's the information to say that all of those 3 to 5 different temperature checks that I've had all came below the recommended temperature threshold, and they would be allowed for into that restaurant on that basis. I don't know whether that's going to be mandated from the UK perspective, but that's just one of the ways that they are looking to get people safely back into pubs and restaurants.
Thanks, Matt. It's a really useful summary. If there's no further questions, then we'll wrap up if that's okay. I'd just like to thank Paul and Matt for joining us as panelists. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you for taking the time and sharing your experiences. I found it really, really useful, and it's certainly something that I'll be taking back to my business to discuss how we look to potentially implement some form of temperature monitoring, which we have been speaking about in quite a lot of detail, really, but we haven't actually implemented anything yet. So I'll certainly be bearing that in mind. Thank you, Fiona, for sharing as usual. I think it's just the final one for me in terms of just watch out for the next couple of breakfast clubs that we've got running over the next few weeks. So we're doing one on hygiene and PPE, specifically in relation to the current COVID situation. We're looking at food safety controls, cleaning, swabbing programs, that type of thing. And then we're also looking to have a session in relation to health and well-being, which is hugely important for everyone, and particularly those that are working at home, and also those that are actually going onto premises and continuing working from the normal places of work. So bear those in mind. Also, thanks for everyone for taking the time to listen. For those of you that may not be SOFHT members, would encourage you to look into the membership program that we have. It's certainly, we know that we have a fair number of members and they get a huge amount of benefit out of it. So I would encourage you to look at that membership as well if you can. Other than that, thanks very much to our panelists again, Fiona, and I'm sure we'll speak again at some point. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Thanks to our panelists. It's been really useful. A very difficult topic, but judging by the number of people that joined today, it's obviously one of interest to many of us. So thanks again, guys. Everybody stay safe.
Excellent.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks all. Take care.